use the same hashtag, so it doesn't matter that much. But it's a good thing to use hashtags. It's good that you mentioned that, because I think that people search for hashtags, or like the click hashtags, and find tweets. So I usually always have a couple of hashtags in my posts.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then now we talked about this a little bit, especially like, okay, retweets are great, but not necessarily just always retweeting. What are some other types of effective post types that you see? And are those things that, like, let's say if you're posting, is it mostly about your game, or is it other types of content?
Yeah, I usually post mostly about my game, or things I want to ask about my game, or things I'm going to do. But polls are really popular. And if I ask polls about my game, like should I use this hat or this chef hat, then I get some feedback. But if I ask something that is more general to everyone, like I asked one time about do you have kids, and how does that work out with making a game? And that engages people. And I always ask a question in the text of the poll, like comment below, tell me about how many kids do you have, or something like that. And that makes more people comment on your tweet, and then that makes it more popular. So it shows up higher up in the top tweets.
Okay, so what you're saying is finding certain post types. So let's say a good probably strategy is to maybe post a bunch of different ones, see what get a lot of interaction. And what you said, from what you find, is polls work really well. From that example, saying, "Hey, do you have kids?" and and that type of thing. And then from there, depending on the type of engagement you get, that could give signals to Twitter in terms of how it's going to showcase that to other people that are kind of like following those types of conversations or hashtags. Correct?
Yeah, right.
And are there ways too that you could kind of like take what you learned from those posts too, and even take it a little bit further? Like, I guess in light of that, are there other effective strategies to scale to kind of increase your following because and your awareness? Because I know that doing all this stuff can be a lot of work, and considering that you have kids, you have a family, and you're doing this on the side, how do you scale these activities to get to the level of engagement that you're currently getting right now?
Yeah, with a limited amount of time, it's hard to scale it, but I have to take some time away from game dev and use it on Twitter instead. Okay. Because if you're just sitting for yourself making a game, and it's amazing in 1 year, no one will know about it. So it's better to have a game that's half ready in a year, and you have maybe 3,000 people following you and getting interested in the game. So, but one thing to grow your following, I think, is just like I said before, ask questions to as many people as possible, and people will eventually be aware of you and think you're helpful, and show your interest in other people's games, and try to help them, give them feedback, or try to maybe sometimes like focus on some people or some games that you find really fun, and try to help them, and they will really give value back to you and make them remember you, and they will help you. And when you need help, like when you're having a trailer you're going to promote, then you can ask them in a direct message, "Oh, can you help me retweet this?" I used to do that a lot, and people are glad to retweet my things. So, but the basics is, it's quite simple. The more you tweet, the more followers you'll get, as long as your profile is interesting. Yeah.
Okay, so make your profile interesting and tweet more frequently. Because I know with like different social media platforms, there's kind of like a certain cadence and maybe or a frequency in which is recommended to tweet. What would you recommend that would be effective with how many times you should tweet on Twitter?
I don't think that's super important, because some people say that you should tweet like 5 times a day, but I think it's more important that it's a quality tweet, like something really interesting, than just tweet something like uninteresting text posts. People don't care about that. It should be something visual that people can engage with.
Okay, and how do you feel about curated content? Because there's a lot of, like, let's say we talked very briefly about automation in the respect of scheduling. But I know that there's some platforms out there that allow you to curate content, which is basically, hey, let's share news or other things that are going on relating to my audience that people can engage with. How do you feel about curated content, like just sharing other articles or things and stuff about on your profile posts to just other types of posts?
I usually don't do that because I try to have my game focus on my game instead. But I try to repost other people's games. But sometimes maybe a really interesting video or article can be interesting. But if you're going to do that, I think it's better to have a focus on just doing that and not trying to promote the game as well. Because I think you have to focus on one thing so people follow you, just see one thing all the time and not many different things. But I've written some articles that I post, and some people retweet them, but I don't think that posting articles that people will eventually find anyway is necessary to increase your followers, because a lot of people do that, and I think you follow someone just for that. I think you follow them for the game, what they're making.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because I've always heard things too where, you should have a certain balance in terms of what your content post is about, but the ones that are going to be following you, it sounds like you're on the same page with this too, are the ones that are going to be like legitimately interested in your game. I mean, sure, there's going to be bots and things out there too, but for the most part, if you're getting people making comments and getting that engagement, that's really what they're there for, is to find out about your game, and if they're genuinely interested in it, they're going to continue to engage with your content, right?
Yeah, I agree.
All right, cool. So another thing, I want to go back real quick too, because you mentioned about taking some time from development, and I know like development is a really important thing for developers, right? Because that's what you're doing. You're making your game. How much time do you take away to do? I'm sure you're doing other things too, but Twitter specifically, and what do you do to kind of manage that time so you don't get like too carried away with something like Twitter and it becomes more of a distraction opposed to something to aid in the promotion and awareness of your game?
Well, I try to not have Twitter open during the time I work with the game. And if I have something interesting I want to show, I save some GIFs and store them for later. And then at certain times, maybe it's the same thing as checking your mail. If you check it all the time, you get really distracted. So close everything else, focus on the game. And then maybe 20% of the time or a little more, use it on Twitter. But sometimes, like I'm not at the computer. I use my phone to talk with people on Twitter. I usually don't count that time, but I guess it's probably much more than I think. But at least 20%, I think it's critical to grow on Twitter.
Okay, so you pretty much have a pretty good cadence in terms of determining about what percentage of time you're going to dedicate to that, and then when you're doing that, you are only focusing on that one thing. So one isn't distracting from the other.
Yeah.
All right. And then in conjunction with the scheduling the tweets while you're doing that activity, that's probably how you can even be more effective with that 20% time. So, and do you ever do things too where, like, let's say you're focusing on like a Twitter task or Twitter activity, are you only ever focusing on like, hey, today I'm just going to maybe look for new people to follow, or I'm just going to look for interesting content, or I'm just going to post stuff about my own game? Or do you always have like one set thing that you particularly follow for that time that you're doing that task?
Yeah, I have a task that I use audience for, and that is to check who is following me that I don't follow back.
Okay.
So I can get a list of everyone that's recently followed me or everyone that's following me and check them out. If they are game devs and interesting, I always follow them back. And sometimes maybe it's a person with 10,000 followers that like my game. And if they are, I usually try to send them a message and talk with them. I usually ask, how did you find me, or do you even know about my game? Because sometimes they follow me and haven't checked the game at all. But usually it's people are interested in the game. So I try to talk with them and maybe try to help them somehow. Because it's usually it's always useful to have know people that have a lot of followers, because when they retweet your stuff, a lot of people see it. But you shouldn't stare so blind at the follower count of your followers, because sometimes they use tricks to get more followers and they have no engagement. So I focus more on the actual game that they're making, and if it's interesting, I always follow them back.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing to look at, because a lot of times, and I think this is one of the things that Twitter can get criticized about, is simply like it can kind of consist of like vanity metrics, if you will, right? Where you're looking at followers and you're like, oh, wow, they have so many, or they have over like 20,000. But that doesn't necessarily mean that user or profile has the quality to back up that follower account. And like you're saying, because anybody could go out to maybe like Fiverr or have any entity like sign up for it or follow this account numerous times, so it looks like they're a lot bigger than what they actually are. But you're saying don't worry so much about that. It really comes down to the quality of the game that you're following or of that user and what they're tweeting, correct?
Yeah, if you want to check if they have real followers, just go to their profile and see what they post. And if they have like 100,000 followers, but they get 3 comments, it's something fishy.
Okay, and that goes back to what you're saying before too, is when you're going to look at people's profiles to see what they're like and stuff, going through and viewing that, and in particular, really seeing what that engagement level is like, because even if they have something that's interesting, if they're not really getting that engagement, there's definitely something up there then.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So this is actually a really good segue to going into our next conversation too, which is, how do you like measure success with, something like Twitter? Because I Twitter as a whole, in terms if you are looking at it, your whole entire funnel and where it plays out to everything, it's really just creating awareness for the most part. And obviously there's some other strategies I'm sure that can be leveraged. But, what are some types of high level goals that you feel Twitter can help you achieve with everything else that you're working on, or as you start getting closer to release?
Yeah, I think just meeting people is really important, because if you're sitting isolated working on a game, you don't get to talk to people, you don't go out, meet people. But on Twitter, you can find people like publishers can contact you, you can find a programmer if you need that, you can find voice actors, and the more people you get to know, the bigger network is, and you can easily find people. So I think that's super important. But also like getting feedback on your game, which helps you make a better game. And also like when you need maybe beta testers or everything related to the success of a game, that helps with the growing on Twitter. Okay,
and now I'm going to play devil's advocate here, which is you're talking about that some of the benefits for higher level goals that Twitter can help out with is like meeting new people, getting feedback on the game, beta testers, and those things. But like, there's other platforms out there too that are similar, or social media. Like you could maybe, from a link, from a networking perspective, you have potentially LinkedIn. For feedback on your game and stuff, you potentially have Reddit. How do you think those? I mean, I'm sure everybody has their place, but how do you think those differ in terms of the type of maybe reach or awareness you can get with Twitter?
I think LinkedIn is very businessy. Like you don't go there to find fun pictures and videos. So I think that maybe if a publisher is looking for you, they will not look for you on LinkedIn, because it's usually too boring. Mm-hmm. They will probably go to Twitter and look for cool games to work with. And Reddit is also cool, but it's kind of anonymous, because you post something, there's no profile really to look at. So I think Twitter is the perfect thing for that. I've tried different platforms like Facebook. They have groups which are someone's moderating them, and if you post something wrong at the wrong time or the wrong day, you get deleted. So I think Twitter is easy to just say what you want to say, and the people who want to listen, they can listen. But Reddit is also good to post things to Reddit sometimes, just to get. Sometimes you might go viral